Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, this week we've got some kind of exciting little news, nothing too major, but we got a couple things cooking, so to speak. I'm going to tell you about my tournament I went to last week, and we are going to talk about the trainers from the new set BREAKPoint. We did the EXs last week, we're going trainers this week, and we're going Pokemon next week. I was considering doing somewhat of a monster podcast today and incorporating them all, so I apologise to anyone that would have liked that. I'm actually recording at 9 o'clock in the evening today. Usually I tend to sit down and do this about 5, 6 o'clock. There are things that I can't talk about on the podcast which have delayed me somewhat today. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, it's Wednesday. And Wednesday means podcast. And no matter what's going on, how busy I am, if I'm going to be that gosh darn busy, I'll record it on Tuesday. We miss a couple episodes a year because of Christmas or I physically can't talk. But other than that, we're rocking and rolling. I should at this stage remind you of the usual things. You can find a complete archive of the podcast at ptcgradio.wordpress.com, and you should be following me on Twitter at TheWassy. If you want to say hello or start an argument with me, you can find me on email at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or indeed you should be checking out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCG It's been a while and I am still psyched that I have a vanity URL. It makes me happy. Now, if you go over to the YouTube channel, what you can find this week is some recorded games from the Norwich City Championships. That's the one I went to last weekend that we are going to be talking about today. And, I've already got round 2 up, which I believe shows Mega Mewtwo. Oh, it's me, actually. Round 2 is me playing Raichu bats against Mega Mewtwo. And round 3 went up last night showing Manectric bats against Lucario bats. And a father-son showdown in round 4. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I believe our very first father-son showdown is going to be going up. I think tomorrow evening that one's going to be going up. It is looking very good this weekend that I'm going to be recording some videos from Loughborough City Championships. That one's expanded. Almost gave up my shot at that tournament because I pre-registered on the Facebook group, as I always do, and I didn't see the notice. My own fault, I should add. I'm not blaming anyone but myself for this. I didn't realise that you had to pay in advance to guarantee your spot, and everyone else did, and I lost my spot. But I've got it back. And I believe I'm going to be recording there. And I've even got my top 10 cards from Heart Gold, Soul Silver. We're going to be doing some history lessons coming up soon. So you can see my top 10 cards from Heart Gold, Soul Silver in the near future as well. Or to put it in a nice simple fashion, I've got like 15 videos going up in the next few weeks. And it's going to be amazing. I'm excited anyway. So starting off with the news this week. I've told you about the Generation set. Now this one's coming out this month, and it's an additional set. It's not our February set. It's not our May set. It's just an extra set. And people have been thinking, well, what's going to be in them? Now I've told you about the new Charizard and Venusaur cards, but the question has been, well, what's going to be in them? Gosh darn it. Well, we now have some confirmation. There was a chap over on Twitter who has been opening BREAKPoint packs. That's the new set, X and Y9. And instead of uncommons, he's been getting Generations cards. I.e. cards from Generations accidentally put into BREAKPoint packaging. Obviously a mistake at the distributor or the manufacturer or however you want to call it. It's given us some information. And as widely expected, there's a whole bunch of reprints. So we're getting Crushing Hammer, we are getting Energy Switch, we are getting Evo Soda, Maintenance, Max Revive, Pokeball, Pokemon Fan Club, Pokemon Center Lady, Red Card, Shauna, Team Flare Grunt, and we're getting a reprint of the Bat line, which is also pretty gosh darn cool, as well as what looks like a reprint of the Machamp line and the Gengar line. So, cool reprints. and some good trainers. So it looks like Generations, probably not unlike Legendary Treasures. In fact, it looks like the new Legendary Treasures. If you think back to Legendary Treasures, there were 2 parts to that set. Part number 1 was essentially a whole bunch of reprints of interesting cards that a whole bunch of reprints of interesting cards and staples for newer players. Part number 2 was Radiant Collection, which was a cute little collection of shiny cards from Japan. Now, if we look at Generations, it looks like a reprint set with some shiny cards just from Japan as Radiant Collection 2. Now, we are going to see some new cards in there as well, but largely it looks like the new Legendary Treasures. Now, for some of you, that might not be terribly exciting, but remember the story I told you recently on the podcast about how my local gaming/comic shop is still having Legendary Treasures in stock, because kids that want to come in and buy their first few packs and get a whole bunch of shiny cards love them Legendary Treasures. We're also getting Imanuki. Now, this was a card that was released ages ago in Japan and has been re-released not too long ago. Now, I believe the picture, and it's an actual picture, not like a cartoon, a photograph, is of a Japanese chap. I believe it's some TV personality. It's a weird card, and it makes perfect sense that it was never released in the English-speaking world or Europe because, well, it just doesn't make any sense. Now, the card reads, "Your active Pokemon is now confused." How cool is that? It's just a random card that confuses your active Pokemon. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is quite frankly awesome. Really, really awesome. I mean, it's not. just to be completely clear, it's terrible. But it's kind of fun that we're getting it. In really good news for everyone that isn't me, Regionals playmats have been announced. They are Greninja Break, and they are beautiful. Anyone who attends Winter Regionals will receive a Greninja Break playmat. I'm putting out the call nice and early, because this is in the US, not Europe. If you go to a US Regionals and you're able to get your hand on a Greninja Break playmat, hit me up on Twitter at @TheWassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I will gladly pay you a fair price for your Greninja playmat if you're willing to ship it over to me in the UK. Obviously, I will cover the shipping as well. Not after freebies. I just want me one of those Greninja mats. They are beautiful. And they're giving them out to everyone who enters, not does well, enters Winter Regionals. So if anyone listening to this can get their hands on one of those Greninja playmats and wants to sell it for a reasonable, fair price, i.e. not like a 400% markup, hit me up. I would love to buy your Greninja mat. Less interesting for me, there are going to be side events at Winter Regionals, and if you win those side events, you're getting a Luxray Break playmat. Now, just to be clear, it's Luxray Break, so compared to Greninja Break, I mean, it can do one, quite frankly. I don't care. If you got one of those mats, I mean, maybe I want to buy it off you. Greninja playmats, oh yes. Luxray playmats, meh. But they're coming anyway, ladies and gentlemen. And the last piece of news, and I hesitate to call it news, but let's rock along with it anyway. Crobat Break has been partially revealed. We know he's Psychic. We know he's a Pokemon Break. And we know he's got 160 HP. And the attack/ability has been blanked out, unfortunately. Which is kind of annoying. Now, I'd like to think it's got an ability, and I'm not entirely sure. Remember, Breaks have either an ability or it has an attack. It's going to have one of those two things. And because it's blanked out, we don't know exactly what it is. Now, I want to say that it's an ability based on the placing, but it really could be either. They've just blanked it out. To be honest, I want it to be an ability because I want it to be kind of cool. I think this will see some play. Because I think I've made this point on the podcast before, but let me say nice and clearly now. When it comes to Crobat Break, we're going to be playing Crobat. Manectric bats, Lucario bats, even Raichu bats if you're an idiot like me and don't want to play EX heavy decks. Not that makes you an idiot. I'm just saying that I am an idiot and I like playing EX heavy decks. non-EX heavy decks. Maybe you like playing those decks, but you wouldn't describe yourself as an idiot. I ain't judging, ladies and gentlemen. You be who you want to be. So if you're playing these cards anyway, all you need to do is tech in one Crobat break. And at one point during the game, when you've already got a Crobat out anyway, just evolve him up. One of the things I like to do when I'm thinking about cards like this is play a few games. And when you're playing those games, have a think. How many turns, on average, when I'm playing, how many turns do I have a Crobat out? I get him out. After I've got him out, how many subsequent turns is that Crobat sitting on the field? And most of the time, ladies and gentlemen, you'd be surprised. There's like 6 or 7 turns a game sometimes where you've got that Crobat sitting there. You can easily find one break evolve, and if he's got even a passingly good attack or ability, he's going to see some play. Maybe not a lot of play, but he's going to see some play. Why wouldn't you, quite frankly? Now, we're going to go through the trainer cards here before I talk about my tournament. No, we'll go through the tournament first. Because I've already kind of given it away. I'll be nice and quick. Nah, I probably won't, you know me. So I went to Norwich City Championships this past weekend, and I chose to play Raichu Bats. Now, the theory behind Raichu Bats is I'm playing it with Yveltal, and it's got Bats. My Night March matchup is insane. Entei is not an easy matchup, but I've got my Lysander and I've got my Milotic to reuse the Lysander. I will do a deck profile of this either before the ECC if I'm not playing it at the ECC, or after the ECC if I am. I've yet to decide. But there will be a deck profile of this deck going off my YouTube soon. People have been asking me to do deck profiles lately, so I think that's something I need to be, shall we say, strongly considering going forward. So, I was playing Raichu Bats, and the way I figure it with Entei is, when they don't have Assault Vest down, I'm killing them easily. When they do, I can Lysander around it, or I'm playing Dark Energy and I'm playing Baby Yveltal, so I can just go ahead and, use him to power up my Raichus. It's not a great matchup, but it's not terrible. And then you bring in the other big deck in Standard, or the other big decks, if you will. Manectric Bats, Lucario Bats, you've got a pretty good matchup against because you're taking out the EXs. And, the other big deck, as well as Night March and Entei, is, of course, Yveltal. And they're using Lightning Weak EXs. So that's pretty good for you. And yes, they can use things like Zoroark, although until you break, he's only got 100 HP, which means Raichu KOs without even having to have a Skyfield down. And Gallade, but they're not going to get Gallade every turn. They're not always going to evolve the Zoroark. And even when they do evolve the Zoroark, they'll need a full bench in order to KO you, and so on and so on. So, it's got good matchups against the top two, pretty good matchup against Entei, workable against Manectric and Lucario Bats. And in any matchup, you can literally just go, boom, I have a full bench, Raichu's going to hit you in the face, and then you're going to win the match. Now, it's got some bad matchups. Anything involving Giratina, not a great matchup, because as soon as they start attacking with Giratina, you lose your Skyfield, you lose your DCEs, and you're in trouble. And it's got a fairly horrific match against Mewtwo. I'm not going to ruin that, though, because if you watch the video I've already put on my YouTube channel, you can see my Raichu Bats against Mewtwo, and I'll explain the matchup in great detail there. So that was my theory. So I took it along, and round 1, I am drawn against a lovely guy called Tariq, or Tariq, I'm sorry if it's mispronounced, sir, and he's playing Vespiquen Night March. Now, this is a more difficult matchup for me, because part of the reason my Night March match is insane is because Baby Yveltal KOs Joltik and Pumpkaboo for 1 energy each. And by the time you've taken a couple prizes, you've got Raichu going, who 1-hit KOs as a non-EX, and then you use Crobat and Golbat to jump ahead in the prize race. The problem is, if your opponent starts attacking with Vespiquen, then Baby Yveltal becomes useless, which then puts pressure on you to be getting your Raichus out to get the KOs while they're still taking a KO every turn. And, of course, it's much more difficult to be, you can't just drop a Crobat and KO a Joltik. You've got to drop 2 Golbats or a Golbat Crobat to KO a Combee. And by the time we get to a 90 HP Vespiquen, it's basically impossible. Whereas even something like a 60 HP Pumpkaboo, you evolve with Crobat, you do 30 damage with the ability. You can then use the attack skill dive to do 30 damage to him on the bench, and he's dead in one turn. It's much more difficult to KO a 90 HP Vespiquen. You basically need Raichu. And then it's really annoying because you've got to be spamming stage 1s with DCE. Whereas against regular Night March, you dump a few bats, you use Evil Towel, the game's really easy. I'd win the match 2-0, but it takes me a lot longer. It takes pretty much until time because it's just a much more difficult matchup with the Vespiquen. Round 2, I am drawn against... I believe I'm drawn against Scott in round 2, if I remember correctly. Because I think that's the one I put up on the YouTube channel. And it's Mewtwo, and I don't want to ruin that one, so I'm not going to tell you how it ended. Round 3, I'm drawn against a lovely chap, whose name I forget now, and that's really annoying. I do apologise. He's a lovely man, and he's playing Evil Towel. Game 1, my deck sets up. He doesn't get a brilliant start. I take out his Evil Towels and shame in for easy prizes. The game's not close. Game 2, he plays the game superbly. He gets his Gallade out. He gets his Zoroark out. He never benches an Evil Towel EX. He is really going for it and really playing very well and very carefully. Dude's 2-0 in this game. So he's really, really playing spectacularly well. And I get to a position where I need an energy and then I can just about finish out the game. And my last Dark, and my last DCE, and my Milotic are my last 3 prizes. I have no energy in the deck, no way to recover them, and I lose. At which point, now I start playing super fast game 3, because my opponent... I mean, don't get me wrong, I think I've got the advantage in the matchup. So, I don't rush my opponent, I rush myself. That's what I was trying to say. And I play super fast. Turns out we finished the game a good 10 minutes before time was called. But I thought we had less time than we did. So I wasn't checking prizes, had to do 2 DCE prizes, which could have gone really badly because I didn't know they were prizes because I was trying to play as fast as I could. And my opponent had a terrible start in round 3. He goes second, and he starts shaming, and he has to bench Evil Towels and shamings. He never gets a Zoroark out. He gets a Zoroark, but I kill it. He never gets a Gallade out, and it's a very quick... I think I win it in 4 turns in the end, because he's forced to play the game I want him to. His setup is very bad. He has very few choices, and I just take out his big EXs. Round 4, I'm drawn against Mewtwo, which is annoying because there are 2 Mewtwo's in a tournament of, I want to say, 23 people. There are 2 Mewtwo's. And in round 4, by round 4, I've played both of them. This one is Luke Kirkham, who, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you should know is an exceptional player. And in both games, there's very little I can do, quite frankly. There's constant situations where I'm 10, 20, 30 damage short of a KO on the Mewtwo. Mega Mewtwo can use Shrine of Memories to use Mewtwo EX's attack, damage change, to completely heal itself. Now, I don't play the matchup as well as I could. Again, go back to my video to watch and get the full explanation. It's a bad matchup. I don't play it as well as I could. I'm always 1 or 2 parts of the puzzle short for the big KOs, and I lose. Which puts me in a very easy position in the final game. I win and I'm definitely in cut. I lose and I'm definitely out of cut. It's Giratina, Tyrantrum, Bronzong. There are 2 Giratinas in the tournament of 23 people. There are 2 Mewtwo's. These are the only decks I'm really worried about. Yeah, Lucario bats can be a pain, but to be honest, Raichu can often one-hit KO Lucario with all the bats, so Lucario's not that scary, and the bats aren't scary, so it's not that bad, and the Horlucha can't really kill anything in your deck other than Shaman. So it's not that bad a matchup. Manectric Bats is, again, it's not easy, but it's not a terrible matchup. There are 2 matches I'm worried about, Mewtwo and Giratina. And 3 of my 5 games have been against them. So we start off, and there's one particular wrinkle in this Tyrantrum deck, which is a huge problem for me. He plays Parallel City. Yeah. So he's limiting my bench to 3 and then attacking with Giratina so I can't replace it. Now, Giratina, as we'll see later, it's not a horrific matchup for me. It's winnable, but you've got to play it perfectly. You've got to really make use of your bats, both in terms of placing the damage counters and attacking with Crobat. You've got to really make use of your Evil Towel. And sometimes you'll just be using Oblivion Wing to do 30 damage and putting an energy on an Evil Towel. Or, putting energy onto a Crobat because you've AZ'd a previous Crobat to reuse the Golbat and Crobat to do more damage, and then you need to put an energy on there to attack with a Crobat. And then you bring in Raichus for kind of when you need the KO. Winnable, but without Skyfield and DCE, it's far more difficult. And most decks that play Giratina also play things like Xerosic and Enhanced Hammer, so you can't even just attach a couple DCEs in the first 2 turns, that ain't gonna fly. So game 1, it's not going terribly well. But he's put a Float Stone on both Giratinas and Tyrantrum. So, I just start using Lysander. Over and over again. He runs out of Float Stones. And then it's a bit of a race. Who has more? Does he have more AZs or do I have more Lysanders? Now, given that I'm playing 2 Lysander and he's playing 1 AZ, that gives me an advantage. But also, he's used a couple of VS Seeker. I've used none. And I sit there and I Lysander. And I do things like Lysander a Bronzong, swoop across. I think I used swoop across like 7 turns in a row at one point. And he takes a few prizes, but I get to a position where not only does he have 2 cards remaining in deck and is about to deck out, but all of his Bronzongs have got 100 damage or less. All of his Giratinas, sorry. And he still doesn't have a Double Dragon on his bench Giratina, although I suspect he was playing very carefully and only putting the Double Dragon down when he really needed to. And I decked him out in the end, but I believe I actually could have won in a prize race at that stage because I'd set up for a whole bunch of KOs using my Evil Towel and my bats and all of that stuff. So I was very proud of myself. It was a game I shouldn't have been able to win, but I wanted to get into Top Cut. Now here's a bit that might make you think less of me. I'm hoping it doesn't, but there's a possibility that it does. The thing is, I know this is a terrible matchup for me. And I know that if we play 2 more, I'm not going to win. But I've snuck game 1, which means if we run out of time without finishing game 2, I win the match. Now, bit of backstory here. Norwich is 2 hours away from me. So we're talking a 4-hour round trip, costing about £20 in fuel, $30 roughly. Then I've paid £10 for entry, roughly $15. And I've had to pay 15 quid for parking for the day, which you can, call that just over $20. So if you're looking in pounds, I've basically spent £35 coming to this tournament. And if you're looking at dollars, you're talking somewhere in the region of about $65. And I've given up my day to come here, and I want to make Top Cut. So there's the background. I slowed the game down. Now, let me be very clear. I at no point slow played, nor would I. That would be dishonest. And it wasn't just in game 2. When I won game 1 in like 35 minutes. And that was very deliberate. I could have won it in like 25. But I was playing every Ultra Ball. And I was looking through my opponent's discard, counting cards as I'm entitled to do. I was not using that to stall. But rather than hoping he'd use VSC, because I was checking. And I was planning my moves very carefully. I was at no point slow playing, and I've spoken to judges in the past. I know what constitutes slow playing. I want to be very clear on this. I don't want anyone to think I was being dishonest. And I did all of my moves, and I benched Pokemon, and I played Ultra Balls, and I did every move that I could. Now, I probably could have won 3 or 4 turns earlier if, when I got him in the position I wanted him to be in, I had just retreated and started taking KOs. I could have done that and won the game about 10 minutes earlier. But retreating and taking KOs was not the way I wanted to win the game. I wanted to win the game by decking him out. And I know that might seem silly. Hang on a second. If you could win the game by taking prizes, why did you deck him out? Because decking him out would take longer. And this is a very important difference. If you've got the win, but you're toying with your opponent just to try and be funny, that makes you a terrible person. Stop playing Pokemon. But there's an element of the game which is clock management. And I didn't want to take 3 EX KOs to win the game. I wanted to deck him out to win the game because I wanted to win it in 35 minutes, not 25 minutes. And then we start game 2. And I haven't shuffled longer than I ever do. I shuffle for if you see me playing Pokemon, I always shuffle a bit, pile shuffle a bit, pile shuffle a bit, off we go. Between every game, it takes about 2 minutes because you're entitled to, I've heard 2 and 3, but I never take more than 2 minutes shuffling. But I take my 2 minutes. And then we start game 2, and I'm checking for prizes like I would in a regular game. And I'm playing all of my cards. And game 2, I'm getting absolutely rolled. But we run out of time. Now, to be clear, my opponent needed 3 or 4 turns after time to win the game. I wasn't going to bench a Shaman. And he couldn't one-hit KO Crobat and Evil Tau. And I played AZ in my deck. So I could very easily have used AZ shenanigans to make him take at least 4 or 5 turns after the end of +3 turns after time. So there was no, 30 more seconds, tee-hee-hee, I stalled him out of a game. I want to be very clear on this. I didn't play slowly, but I won slower than I could have done, taking more turns than I could have done, and I did it because that gave me the greatest chance of winning a game, which was literally if you win, you're in top cut, if you lose, you're out, if you draw, you're out. Now, I saw a similar post on Burbank City Gym the other day. Somebody saying, if I've got the win, but I don't take it, is that really annoying? And my answer to that question is very simple. If you are playing legally and not slow playing, and you are taking longer to win, i.e. increasing the amount of turns you need to win, not just sitting there looking at your cards, then that's a skill that you need because it's clock management. And it can backfire because sometimes you wait a couple of turns and your opponent draws what they need and beats you. That has happened to me before. I'm not proud of that. But if you're sitting there and you've got the win, but you play 4 or 5 cards and then you take the win, that's not cool. I was playing a game the other day and I was thinking, it was a Raichu actually, and I was thinking, right, now I need this, and this, and then I need a Floatstone to get the Milotic out of the active, but what are my odds of hitting the Floatstone off this Sycamore? And I played a few more cards, and I was trying to work out the probabilities, and then it occurred to me, I've played a couple of Shamans and drawn cards without using Sycamore. I've got an AZ in hand, so I just played the AZ for the win. Now that I wasn't proud of, because I should have realised earlier I could just AZ for the win. But that's different. I'm talking about clock management to win a timed best-of-3 game. If you disagree with me, you know the deal, at the Wassy or ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. So in the top 8, I'm drawn against James Butler, a lovely chap who's playing Giratina Seismitoad. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. In 6 rounds, I had played Giratina or Mewtwo 4 times. And there were only 4 of those decks in the tournament. I'd played them all. Lovely chap, James. Very enjoyable game. Game 2, I had nothing. I drew nothing. I scooped after turn 2 because my lone Zubat was going to be KO'd. Game 1, I played very, very carefully. I used Baby Eviltal. I used Dark Energy on the Raichu. And I used Bats. And I eked out a win, I think, playing very carefully. Now, there were some factors going in my favour here. Number 1, he couldn't hit heads on Super Scoop Up or Crushing Hammer, and that was big. Factor 2, he played Silent Lab, not Parallel City, and that was a huge, huge bonus for me. A huge bonus. And then we got to game 3. He drew poorly, and I went aggro with Raichu and managed to pull out the win. So I advanced to top 4, where I played, you guessed it, Mewtwo. I played Scott Simmons, and essentially it was just like when I played Luke. There were turns when I was very, very close, but I never quite had all the pieces, and I lost a series that I should have lost to a really good player who was playing a deck that should have beaten mine, and I don't mind those losses. I lost to Mewtwo at least twice that tournament, and quite frankly, yeah, I have no problem with that. I lost to good players who played well with decks that should have beaten mine, and there's no shame in that. And I ended up finishing in 3rd place and winning 30 championship points and 4 packs, from which I drew nothing. But that's not the point. 4 packs, 30 points, and I'm glad of the way I played round 5. I want to reiterate one last time, I didn't slow play, but I played in a way that made me win later, so that I could take advantage of the timing rules in Pokemon. And I said to my opponent at the end, if you thought I was slow playing, I would never... And if anyone plays me, you can quote me on this if you come play me in a tournament. I will never be offended if you call a judge on me because you think I'm slow playing. I never intentionally slow play, and if I am ever slow playing, I will be very apologetic and speed up. But I would never be upset if someone called a judge on me for that. So, that was my tournament. Raichu Bats, terrible pick on the day. One Night March, no Entei, few Yveltal flying around, few Bats decks flying around. But the fact that probably the two best players there in Luke Kirkham and Scott Simmons were both playing Mewtwo, and there were a couple other good players playing Giratina, Raichu Bats was for that particular metagame, it was a bad call. Is it something worth playing at the ECC? I don't know is the honest answer. Now, the ECC is basically the last tournament in the X and Y2 breakthrough format before Breakpoint comes in. Is Raichu Bats viable? Dunno. It's got a very weak matchup to Mewtwo, but just to be clear, I would not expect much Mewtwo in something like the ECC, because there will be a whole bunch of Night March. And Night March destroys Mewtwo. Well, that's why Mewtwo hasn't been cleaning up at tournaments. So I'm not worried about Mewtwo in big tournaments because Raichu Bats Night March just destroys it. Now, am I worried about Giratina? A little bit, but if they don't play Parallel City, it's not that bad a matchup. And I could put something in like a Jirachi and a Super Rod, and now I've got more basic energy, and I can get rid of their special energy. Now I've got a much stronger matchup. That I'm good with. As for other games, the biggest problem is you're playing a Stage 1 deck with a Stage 2 support line. So you're playing kind of a 4-4 Raichu and at least, and I cut down as far as I could, a 3-3-2 Crobat line. You get dead hands. Because there's so many Pokemon in there that aren't draw Pokemon. You do get some dead hands. Is it consistent enough to play at a big tournament like the ECC? The honest answer is, I don't know. I might end up playing it, but it's not something I would suggest for somebody else. If you're playing at the ECC, well, the choices are simple. Entei, Night March, Yveltal, Manectric Bats, Lucario Bats. Maybe Seismitoad Giratina. They are the decks to consider. Can Raichu Bats beat all of them? Absolutely. Can it draw dead and lose to all of them? Absolutely. Raichu Bats is another one of those decks. It doesn't have any amazing matchups, but it's all right. Even Yveltal, if they don't play the EXs and they set up faster than you, you'll probably lose that game. So, interesting testing, but 5 of my 7 games being against Mewtwo or Giratina really made me a little bit sad. Anyway, it's enough about my tournament. Let's talk about some new games. As I said, this coming weekend, I shall be in Loughborough at the Weekend Warriors Expanded City Championship. So we shall see how it works out. So, in terms of the trainers from BREAKPoint, there are Spirit Links for both Scizor and Gyarados. I don't need to say much about these. They're amazing cards because they make Scizor and Gyarados playable. If we didn't have these cards, then Scizor and Gyarados wouldn't be playable. And I told you last week, and go back and listen to last week's to hear my opinion on the EXs, but as a quick little spoiler alert, Gyarados looks good. I really like Mega Gyarados. Pokemon have made it clear, if you come in a set, you're getting a Spirit Link. Still waiting to find out if we're getting Spirit Links for Charizard and Venusaur, maybe even Blastoise, in the Generation set. My inkling is that we will. We shall see. There are some reprints in the set. Great Balls being reprinted. I mean, it's not great, to be honest. That's right. I described Great Ball as not great. Go on. Yeah. You're not going to play it very much. Tierno's getting a reprint. Somebody made a good point the other day. Cherin got printed like twice. And then since then, we've had Tierno, which is the same draw-free cards, over and over and over and over again. What have TPCI, the Pokemon Company International, what have they got in favour of Cherin? In favour of Tierno? What have they got against Cherin? I don't get it. You don't need this card in your life. There's a reprint of Potion. Potion is one of those cards like Switch, and I believe Energy Switch, that I think I'm right in saying has been legal in every format ever. It's going to get reprinted a bunch more times because it's a card they want in the format. Sycamore's getting a reprint. It's about time it got a reprint. It came out in X and Y, but remember, it was a basic reprint other than in name of Professor Juniper. They clearly like this supporter. They want it sticking around. And like with all of these reprints, what it means is that it's going to survive more rotations now that it's been reprinted. There's a reprint of Pokemon Catcher, but since it's had the coin flip introduced, it's been nerfed. Had a brief resurgence when Lissandra's trump card came around, and we had a situation where you could run through your entire deck with trainer cards, play Lysander's trump card to get all of those cards back in your deck, and then do it every turn. I played a Donphan deck at the time, as I told you. Pokemon Catcher briefly became a very, very powerful card. Because if you were using, if you used Trump card 3 times in a game, you had 12 Pokemon Catchers. Which means, on average, you're going to hit heads on 6 of them. Yeah. And then you could take out Lysander and you could use Random Receiver, so then you wouldn't hit the Lysander. It was a really good card, ladies and gentlemen. Although I did feel really mean when I played that Donphan deck against Kirsten Gregory, and I think I hit 4 catches in a row in the space of 5 turns to win the mirror match. I felt like a bad person when I did that. Although she wasn't playing Pokemon Catcher, so maybe it's not the end of the world. Now that Trump card isn't in the set, people will play it occasionally. It's a coin flip card, and like most coin flip cards, it's high risk, high reward. There will be situations where you hit the heads and it's the best thing ever, and there will be situations where you hit tails and it sucks. And Max Potion is getting a reprint. Now, this is a reprint of note, because every other card I've just mentioned is already standard legal. It's just going to be in the format for slightly longer now that we've had a reprint. Okay, fair enough. But Max Potion is getting an actual factual reprint. Max Potion hasn't been legal since it was last printed in Plasma Freeze as a secret rare. I.e., for this format, we haven't had it. We've not had Max Potion. And Max Potion is good. Now, there's a few uses for Max Potion. For newer players, let me run through a couple of them nice and quickly. Firstly, it's the ultimate annoying card. Ha 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 ha, your Pokemon has got, 100 damage on. I'm going to kill it next. You've just played Max Potion. But also, there are entire decks built around Max Potion, the most obvious of which would be Aromatisse. You use Aromatisse to be able to rearrange all the fairy energy on your side of the field. So you rearrange all the fairy energy, use Max Potion to heal your Pokemon, then move all the fairy energy back. Remember, Max Potion completely heals your Pokemon, but forces you to discard all energy attached to it. Well, if you can move the energy off, then it doesn't matter when you completely heal it, because you've still got that energy you can put back on. It's a really powerful card. Max Potion is a deck maker. Max Potion is the kind of card that will make particular decks. It really will. Now let's go through some brand new cards now. All Night Party! I'm tempted to ask the question, what comes before Part B, but I feel that might be just a little bit juvenile for this podcast. First thing to mention, the art on All Night Party, beautiful. We've got an Umbreon running around away from a Weavile, who I'm assuming isn't trying to viciously murder him, but I can't confirm. It's just awesome. There's a Cresselia in front of the moon. It's one of the best looking cards we've had in ages. Is it any good? Short answer, yes. Once during each player's turn, if that player's active Pokemon is asleep, you may remove that special condition and heal 30 damage. Now, when expanded, the obvious point here is Laser. Your opponent hits heads on Laser, does 30 damage because Burbank City Gym's in play. You put down All Night Party, you wake up, you heal the 30 damage. It's as if the Laser was never played. But there is a better reason for this. Now, I'm going to have to jump a little bit in the future to next week's podcast. But I told you last week about Darkrai and that brilliant attack that did 160 damage if your opponent's Pokemon was asleep. Now, there are many ways to put it asleep. Let's go through the main 3. First, in expanded only, we've got Mana. Flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is asleep. If tails, you are. We've got Malamar, which is my preferred one, to be honest, although I see him in the minority. My good friend Joe Bernard, he of Omnipoke. If you've watched all my videos on YouTube, I recommend checking him out. His channel is, I'm going to be honest here, and I don't mean to offend anyone when I say this, it is my favourite non-PTCG radio Pokemon channel. That doesn't mean I don't like others, because I absolutely do, but Omnipoke's my favourite, ladies and gentlemen. I have picked a favourite, but this is an independent podcast. I'm allowed to pick favourites. There are plenty of other good channels out there I enjoy watching as well, just so we're clear. Now, he told me that Malamar's bad. I disagree. I like Malamar. Malamar, you attach an energy to Malamar, an EX on the bench, and it puts your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep. No coin flip, no putting yourself asleep. But you need to put the energy on Malamar, not Darkrai, and you can use cards like Max Ether, more on that in a moment, and in expanded Dark Patch to get the energy onto Darkrai. But if the energy isn't on there and you can't hit those cards, then you don't want to waste your energy attachment on Malamar. The other option is Hypno, who's got an ability whereby you put both active Pokemon to sleep. Good point, guaranteed sleep on your opponent. Bad point, guaranteed sleep on you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where All Night Party comes in. You use Hypno to put both Pokemon asleep, use All Night Party to wake you up, and yeah, next turn your opponent's going to be able to use it to wake themselves up, except they're not, because you're getting a one-hit KO with Darkrai. That's the main use for it. And yeah, anyone can put All Night Party into their deck. But think back to all the decks we've got at the moment. If you're playing a fighting deck, you're playing Fighting Stadium. If you're playing Night March or another Psychic deck, you're playing Dimension Valley. If you're playing Manectric and you want to do some healing, you're playing Rough Seas. And that's the way the format goes at the moment. Most decks have a stadium they need to play. Skyfield in Raichu Bats, Forest of Giant Plants in Vespiquen. I could go on, but I'm hoping you get the point. Most decks don't have space for a random utility stadium. And for that reason, I don't think people are just going to tech All Night Party in. But I think if you're playing one of these Darkrai decks and you want to use Hypno to put your opponent to sleep, and yourself to sleep, you're going to use All Night Party. And you get to heal 30 damage while you do it. So it's a potion. Essentially, you play Hypno, and it puts your opponent to sleep and heals 30 damage from you. A card of which I am particularly fond is Bursting Balloon. Now, okay, I'm going to have to do this one from memory. If your opponent attacks your Pokemon that has Bursting Balloon attached, then they take 60 damage. But it gets discarded at the end of your turn regardless. Okay, is that a good thing? Yes. Because one of two things is going to happen. Either they attack you and take 6 damage counters, or they don't attack you. So I'm putting Bursting Balloon, or Burst Balloon, or whatever it's called in this country, well, outside of Japan to be more accurate, I'm putting that on whatever I don't want to be KO'd. And okay, my opponent can KO it and take 6 damage, or not KO it, and then I've got my wish, because they're not KOing the Pokemon I don't want them to KO. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming out of that exchange happy. Go me, whoop, and just to finish off, whoop. Now, my preferred use for this, and this is nothing more than an example, but my preferred use for this would be Greninja. Now, Greninja, you're using the break to place 6 damage counters. You're using Greninja XY to place 3 damage counters. And then you're doing, the attacks of Greninja, the maximum one, you're doing 80 damage. That's on the X and Y9, the BREAKPoint Greninja. If you don't block abilities, if you do the big attack, there's 2. One blocks abilities, one does the big attack. So, with this, you can basically, let's say you put it on a Greninja break, they hit you and take 60. You can then drop 6 damage counters with Greninja's ability and then hit them for 80. That's 200 damage. What if they're a Mega Pokemon? One X and Y Greninja on the bench, and now you're doing 230 in one turn with a non-EX Pokemon with one energy attached. Now, you have to have two in your hand to discard with the Greninja Break and a Greninja's ability. The point is, Greninja is good because without attaching much energy, you can build the damage up quickly, and Bursting Balloon allows you to do that in a very, very good way. Coming up next, we have Delinquent. Now, I don't know what to think about Delinquent. I'm going to talk more about Delinquent in a moment when we look at when we look at the last card and when we look at Sableye Expanded. Delinquent, discard a stadium in play. If you do, your opponent discards 3 cards from his or her hand. Now, your opponent has a choice of which cards to discard, but let's be clear on this, ladies and gentlemen. And again, like I said with the Crobat, you can test this out yourself. Randomly when playing, have a look at your hand during a turn. Have you got 3 cards you're willing to discard? Most of the time, the answer's no. You're going to end up discarding your supporter or your special energy, or there are many turns you don't have 3 cards in your hand. So your opponent plays Delinquent, and then all of a sudden, you are just hoping to top deck something, or you can't play. I think Delinquent is going to be played mostly like Judge is played, and it is nothing more than a guess. I could be wrong. Judge is played as a ha, I'm playing this on a turn to try and screw you over, so you are now no longer able to play the game. Fair enough. Imagine a turn 1 Delinquent. Your opponent starts with a hand of 6 cards generally. You make them discard 3 of them. Now, unless, if they're playing a Bronzong deck and they've got 3 Metal Energy in hand, they'll love you for it. If they've got a VS Seeker in hand, you can make them discard the Sycamore and it's not a big deal. But there's an awful lot of games where you can play a turn 1 Delinquent and your opponent is going to be forced to discard a card that, quite frankly, they don't want to discard. And we'll talk about it more in a moment. Coming up next, Fighting Fury Belt. Quite simply, it's Muscle Band, but it's not Muscle Band. It can only be attached to a basic, and it does 10 extra damage, not 20. And it adds 40 HP, which is frankly ludicrous. Manectric now has 210 HP, Manectric EX. Shaman has 150 HP. I could keep going. Yeah, it adds less damage than Muscle Band, but it gives 40 more HP. Fighting Fury Bout, let me make it very clear, it's gonna see a lot of play. And the test for whether you should play Fighting Fury Belt is very, very simple. If you can afford to only do 10 more damage, play Fighting Fury Belt. Obviously, if you're not playing basics, don't play Fighting Fury Belt. These are all assuming you're playing basics. If you need the 20 damage to work the maths in key matchups, if you need that extra 20 to exactly hit the right numbers in key matchups, then you have to play Muscle Band. Outside of that, Fighting Spirit Belt is probably better. Max Elixir is another card, and one of my favourite cards in the set. I'm going to do my top 10 cards from BREAKPoint in the near future, and when I do, I'd be very surprised if Max Elixir doesn't make the list. Max Elixir, look at the top 6 cards of your deck and attach a basic energy card to a basic Pokemon on your bench. This is going to open up combos we've never had before. If Venusaur gets a Spirit Link, this is going to be good for Venusaur. Darkrai, it's going to be really good in these Darkrai decks. Go back to last week where I talked about Darkrai in more detail. Point is, you need to get energy out quickly. And things like Machamp, which has always been a little bit expensive to use properly, now becomes a viable card because of Max Elixir. Any basic, and I'm basically talking EXs here, that used to be too expensive, looked cool but too expensive. Max Elixir now goes, no, hang on a second. Maybe I'm not too expensive anymore. Now, the key about Max Elixir, and I talked about this when I was on Team Fish Knuckles channel with the chat with him and Andrew Wambolt from the Charizard Lounge a couple of weeks ago. This is not a question of testing, it's a question of mathematics. You can work out how many, and someone will do a table for this at some point. You can figure out how many energy you're playing and the statistical chance of you hitting an energy using Max Elixir. And the reality is, if you put 4 Max Elixir in your deck and you put enough basic energy, and it is basic, not special as far as a translation I've seen goes, I'm pretty sure it's just basic. If you put enough basic energy in your deck, you will hit them more often than not on Max Elixir. It is awesome. Last 2 supporter cards are not terribly impressive. Misty's Determination I quite like. Discard a card from your hand. If you do, look at the top 8 cards and put one of them into your hand. The thing is, most of the time, when you play something like a Trainer's Mail, when you look at the top 4 cards and grab a trainer card, you will usually be wanting to do that in order to grab a supporter card. And that's not an option you have here. Well, I mean, you can grab a supporter, but you can't use it till next turn. This is going to be really good for digging if you need that Crobat to get the KO, if you need that double colorless energy now. But that's really what it's good for. I could see this as a nice one-off. So let's say, for argument's sake, I've got a VS Seeker in hand, and I really need that double colorless energy to get the KO this turn. I use VS Seeker to grab my single copy of Misty's Determination, and then I use Misty's Determination, hoping to hit a DCE from the top 8 cards. We've all had that situation where you've played a Sycamore and crossed your fingers because there's one card you need from that Sycamore, and if you hit it, you win the game. Or at least you get a massive advantage. That's what Misty's Determination does, except you get to look at 8 cards rather than 7, so you've got a better chance of hitting it. However, we've also all been in that situation where you've played a Sycamore and needed 2, 3, 4 cards to get that combo for the win. And that's what Misty's Determination doesn't do. I don't see this as a staple, but, you know, when you're desperate for a Forest of Giant Plants to get the Vileplume going, or you're desperate for a DCE to get that attacker going, that's where Misty's Determination shines. So like so many supporter cards, and I pretty much said this about Delinquent, although I don't think I said it explicitly. Like so many supporter cards in the modern format, it literally is going to be one of those, you put 1 or 2 copies in your deck, and you reuse it with VS Seeker. Speaking of which, when you really need it. Speaking of which, if they don't reprint VS Seeker, how lost are we all going to be when they rotate VS Seeker? Because we have gotten awfully reliant on that card. The last card, or the last supporter anyway from the set, is Psychic's Third Eye, and this is a weird one that I could see having some niche uses. First, your opponent reveals his or her hand. Now, this gives you extra information, but it also allows you to make a more educated decision. And then you discard as many cards as you like from your hand, and then you draw that many cards. Nice and simple. So you could discard 7 cards and draw a new 7, or whatever. Now, I kind of like this card, and I'm literally liking it more and more I look at it. Because let's say, for argument's sake, you've got a Sycamore in your hand. So, in order to play the Sycamore, you need to discard every card in your hand and draw more. Here, let's say you've got a Sycamore and 2 DCE. You've got Psychic's Third Eye, a bunch of cards and 2 DCE. You can keep the DCE, which you're going to need later, and just discard everything else. But of course, the big downside, if you discard 1 card, you draw 1 card. Now, you also get to look at your opponent's hand, which is not to be underestimated, because that gives you some really good information. If you've been playing a while and you've played a variety of decks, you can probably look at your opponent's hand and guess what they're going to do next turn. So you can set up for that list turn. I.e., if you know they've got a Lysander and you know they're going to KO your Shaman next turn, you can maybe use Sky Return to get that Shaman off the field, for argument's sake. Biggest downside, and of course, let's not forget there are decks like Vespiquen springs to mind, where your goal of your deck is to discard as many cards as quickly as you can. However, it's far from ideal, because let's say, you know, you empty your hand and you top deck a Sycamore. That's awesome. You get a new hand of 7 cards and life is good. Now let's say you've got an empty hand and you top deck Psychic's Third Eye. Whoops. Because let's not forget, as soon as you play Psychic's Third Eye, that card is no longer in your hand. So that doesn't count as one. So if you've got a hand of 0 and you draw Psychic's Third Eye, you draw 0 cards. You still get to look at your opponent's hand, but you draw 0 cards. And that's the problem. Splash Energy, we've spoken about before. It is a water energy, but a special energy, so it's only water once it's attached to a water Pokemon. And it can only be attached to a water Pokemon. And if that water Pokemon is KO'd, you get to put the Pokemon back into your hand. Could be useful in something like Greninja, for instance. And to be fair, in Greninja, remember the XY9 Greninja, I need to say BREAKPoint. The BREAKPoint Greninja has the attack which allows you to put a water energy back into your hand. So you get to attack and put the energy back into your hand, which is kind of useful. I just need to double check the wording on this quickly, make sure it is as I thought it was. But essentially, maybe you can use that to reuse the Greninja. To reuse the energy, sorry. Either way, it's not going to see a huge amount of play. We've talked about this at quite some length. And essentially, what it comes down to is playing special energy is very, very risky. So when you play special energy, you have got to get a lot from it. Flash Energy has seen a little bit of play because taking away weakness on Manectric is pretty big. Strong Energy has seen a lot of play. And, for that, because you're doing an extra 20 damage, it's a muscle band. It's a really good card. Is this as good? No, is the honest answer, ladies and gentlemen. So let's look at the Greninja just very quickly. Let's see what it can do. Now, I'm just checking English translation because by a Japanese translation, it would totally work. So looking at this, so Greninja's attack says, Moonlight Splash, 60 damage. You may put a water energy from this Pokemon to your hand. If you do, the attack does 20 more damage. Now, once Splash Energy is attached to Greninja, it counts as a water energy, so you get to put it back into your hand and save it. I.e., you can attach it, attack, get it back in your hand. Job's a good un. You are now taking away the chance of the bad thing happening. If you think it's going to get KO'd anyway, then you leave the energy attached to Greninja, and what are they going to do? They can get rid of the energy, but you're expecting to lose it anyway, and if they don't get rid of the energy, you get to recycle Greninja, and everybody's happy. Here's the downside, ladies and gentlemen. Greninja Break does 60 damage, or spreads 6 damage counters, when you discard a water energy from your hand. Greninja X and Y gets you to place 3 damage counters when you discard a water energy from your hand. Splash Energy does not count as a water energy when it's in your hand, only when it's attached to a Pokemon. So to recap, you can use it on Greninja, and it's unlikely to be gotten rid of because you can put it back in your hand and reuse it next turn. But it's not a basic energy, which means you can't use it for Greninja's ability. You can't use it with Professor's Letter, you can't use it with Fisherman, and you can't use it with Energy Retrieval. So why would you want to play it in the Greninja deck? If a Pokemon deck gets really big in the future, based around water Pokemon, maybe Splash Energy sees a little bit of play, but it's not as good as Flash Energy, it's not as good as Strong Energy, and pretty much every type now has had this special energy. Burning Energy ain't seeing any play. Wonder Energy, or whatever the fairy one's called, is not seeing very much play. None of them are seeing very much play, except Flash and Strong, and that's because they're really good cards. I'm not sure Splash Energy counts. Reverse Valley, here's a fun little one. Reverse Valley allows you to, it's another one of these reversible stadiums. And you can either have Metal Energy, let me try again. I know I could just go back and edit that bit out, but I like this to sound organic, gosh darn it. Either any damage done to this player's metal Pokemon is reduced by 10, or any any attack done by this player's dark Pokemon do 10 more. Now, I'm not sure about this. Now, in Bronzong decks, you could certainly play this, but then Steel Shelter stops special conditions, and that's really good. Similarly, Dark decks would do really well with this. However, in Expanded, you're probably going to want to play Burbank City Gym to take advantage of Hypnotoxic Laser poison damage, or you're going to be playing a Darkrai-centered deck where you're probably going to want All Night Party. What you're not probably going to want... Now, doing the extra 10 damage is awesome. But as I said before, stadiums, we're at a stage in the format where we've got so many good stadiums. And it's got to be really good now to really make it worth doing. Really make it worth playing. And I'm not sure Reverse Valley is. Now, don't get me wrong. When we've got a strong metal deck, I think that this could see play for metal Pokemon. But to be perfectly honest, at the moment, most of the good metal decks play Giratina and Tyrantrum, not metal attackers. Now, I know there are some Edge-Slash decks out there, but they're in the minority. Similarly, there are good dark decks out there, but there are better stadiums for those dark decks. One last little point on this. The other reversible stadium, Parallel City, had negative effects on both players. One had damage from some Pokemon reduced, one had to have free bench. Whereas this have positive effects on both players. One gets the damage reduced if they've got metal Pokemon, the other gets the damage increased if they're dark Pokemon. And, I mean, spoiler alert, when I do my top 10 cards of Breakpoint, Darkrai is going to be right up there, but I can't imagine anything but Puzzle of Time being number one. Puzzle of Time is redonk. I'm watching a lot of How I Met Your Mother lately. This card is stupid. And I mean, it's so good, it's probably going to see something get banned and expanded. Like how Shiftry got banned because it was potentially too good. I think, or Lissandra's trump card got banned because it was too good. I could see Puzzle of Time being banned and expanded. It's too good. Now, initially, it's not actually that good, which I know flies in the face of everything I've just said. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. Now, that's useful. That adds consistency. That means if you need a supporter, maybe it wasn't the next card, maybe it was the second or third card in your deck, you're going to get it next turn. So it adds consistency in the same way that Galley's Premonition does, and that's good. But that's not why this card is redonk, ladies and gentlemen. Because this harks back to cards we've had in the past. Pokédraw Plus on Pokéblower Plus, for instance. Now, Pokédraw Plus was a card I played in my Speed Don fan list, which is still probably my favourite deck I've ever played. And if you played 1, you drew a card. It's okay, but it's not great. If you played 2, you got to search your deck for any 2 cards. Well, Puzzle of Time allows you to search your discard pile for any 2 cards. That's ridiculous. So let's say, for argument's sake, you're playing a Night March deck. Now, you need 6 attacks generally to win the game, unless you're KOing EXs. You've got 4 DCEs. You need 2 more DCEs to win the game. You play 2 Puzzle of Time, you get 2 DCE out the discard pile. You can get a DCE and a Lysander, or whatever. You can recover any... Now, imagine how good VS Seeker is, because you get to take a supporter from the discard pile. Now imagine it's any 2 cards, and they don't have to be supporters because it's any 2 cards. It is ludicrously good. Now, I might be overstating this, but I don't think I am. I think this is going to be the way we make... This is going to change the way we make decks. So one thing, and this shouldn't surprise regular listeners of the podcast. One of the things I've been... And I know we've broken an hour, but I'm on a roll. Let's have another 5 minutes. I'll let you go. I mean, if you really want to go, just press... I mean, please don't. You'll make me feel sad. But if you really want to stop listening, just press stop. But I've got 5 more minutes on me on this bad boy. And you should listen to this because this is important stuff right now. Puzzle of Time is going to change the way we make decks. I've been making Greninja decks this past week. And I cannot bring myself to make any deck that doesn't have 4 Puzzle of Time in. Because I'm just thinking, well, hang on a second. Let's say I put a Greninja active. I can search my discard pile for a Fisherman and a Bursting Balloon. So I can attack with Greninja and use Greninja's ability and attach a Bursting Balloon. all in one turn. Or I can go and grab a Lysander and a Greninja Break so that I can KO a Shaman by bringing it into the active and doing 80 and then doing Greninja's ability. There are so many, and this is going to make both VS Seeker and Battle Compressor more powerful. As it is, decks that can get away with it, any decks that play from the discard pile, play 4 Battle Compressor and everybody plays 4 VS Seeker. So you're playing Vespiquen and you've got that engine. Discard it with VS Seeker, with Battle Compressor, grab it back with VS Seeker. And decks that don't have that kind of miss it. But you can't always justify it. Well, now, Battle Compressor, VS Seeker and Puzzle of Time essentially gives an engine to every deck. Discard it with Battle Compressor, grab it back with these cards. Late game, use Battle Compressor to thin out your deck. Now, I don't think every deck is going to play 4 Battle Compressor to take advantage of this. But I think it's going to give an inherent advantage to any decks that are playing Battle Compressor. Maybe there's a card you want that isn't in your discard pile. Well, you can probably, try and save a Battle Compressor so you can play Battle Compressor right before you drop your Puzzle of Time. It really is that gosh darn good, ladies and gentlemen. I truly believe this is going to change the way we make decks. But it's broken and expanded. And the reason is Sableye. Sableye's Junk Hunt ability allows you to take 2 trainer cards from your discard pile and put them into your hand. You just take 2 Puzzle of Time. Because instead of taking 2 trainer cards to use next turn, you take 2 Puzzle of Time to use next turn, and then the next turn you take any 2 cards from the discard pile, whether they're trainers or energy or anything. For instance, let's give an example, Life Dew. One of the things that the Sableye deck in Expanded, Sableye, for those, and I should make a video of this, and if I get time I will. Essentially, you get Sableye, you Junk Hunt and use hammers to get rid of their energy, Trick Shovel to deck them out, lasers to try and kill them. You stop them playing using trainers and reusing those trainers using Sableye. And one of the problems is you use Life Dew. You attach Life Dew to Sableye, Sableye gets KO'd, Life Dew goes in the discard. Next turn you Junk Hunt, but then your turn's over and you can't attach Life Dew. Well, that's no longer an issue. Sableye gets KO'd, Life Dew gets put in the discard pile, and then on your very next turn, use Puzzle of Time to get Life Dew back and immediately attach it. So you can always make sure you've got a Puzzle of Time, you've got a Life Dew attached to Sableye by virtue of Puzzle of Time. And did I mention Delinquent earlier? I believe that I did. Because you can Delinquent every single turn using this. And not only that, but Puzzle of Time lets you get 2 cards from the discard pile. So you can use Delinquent to make your opponent discard 3 cards and then play an Enhanced Hammer, or a Crushing Hammer, or a Laser, or anything else you wish. Winter Regionals, ladies and gentlemen, and in the UK, all the regionals coming up are expanded. And it's just going to be a Sableye fest. Now, I don't think it's the end of the world. For instance, Greninja, I think, can work around this by ignoring the active Sableye. He's always going to have a Life Dew on him. And taking out the bench using abilities and trying to keep cards in your hand to fight Delinquent while discarding energy to KO all the Pokemon on the bench. That's an option for Greninja. However, even that's going to be a very difficult matchup because they're going to keep getting rid of your energy and using Delinquent. And if you can use a Fisherman every turn to get your energy back, that's fine. But if you can't, you're going to end up with no cards in your hand. Because remember, they're discarding 3 cards from your hand pretty much every single turn. So you're going to have to make sure you've got 3 discardable cards. And you can do that, but it's a slight problem. So you would not use Battle Compressor, and every turn they Delinquented, you'd try and make sure you had useless cards in your hand you can get rid of. It would be difficult, but winnable. But almost every other deck, hey, I'm going to play Vespiquen, I'm never going to have double colorless energy. And every time I take a KO, they're going to have a Life Dew attached. Hey, I'm going to play Darkrai, taking advantage of Max Ether and Dark Patch and all of that. Well, I'm going to have a Life Dew attached every single turn, and I'm going to start getting rid of all of your energy at the same time. That's a problem. The only decks that really can beat Sableye, there's a couple of options. Option number one, you ignore the active Sableye and kill the bench, because a good Sableye deck will have a Life Dew attached every single turn. Remember, they've got computer they haven't got computer search. Remember, they've got enough cards like Sableye and Trainer's Mail, they should be able to find it pretty quickly. And then they will always have it, because they will junk hunt every turn. And they'll get 2 Puzzle of Time. That's annoying. The other way is, of course, Trainer Lock. Using either Seismitoad or using, you need Vileplume and you need to go first. But even then, they're going to use Zerosic to try and get rid of your DCE. And they're going to use Delinquent to try and get rid of your thing. And they're still, it's still going to take time to kill those Sableyes. So Sableye is not unbeatable, but it's going to be either you play Sableye or you play a direct counter like Toad. Toadbats might have an okay time, depending how often they Delinquent and how well they set up before you get the Trainer Lock on. And maybe Vileplume, although if you go second, it's a big disadvantage. And maybe something like... I'm not saying Greninja's going to be great. I use it as an example, because Greninja can just never attack and just make sure that you're constantly discarding energy to hit the bench and then saving your Fisherman and your VS Seeker and all that to reuse the energy every turn. Difficult, but doable. So... that's what it's going to come down to, because pretty much every other deck, ladies and gentlemen, you get a good player playing a good Sableye list. Every turn they get rid of your energy and pop down a Life Dew and sit there laughing in your face. It's going to break the game, ladies and gentlemen. I'm putting like 60-70% chance here that something gets banned as a result of this card. Might be Puzzle of Time, might be Sableye, might be Life Dew. But I'm expecting something to be banned because Puzzle of Time makes Sableye redonkulous. I don't think it makes Sableye unbeatable. What I think it does do is vastly dilute the deck pool we've got. And quite frankly, that's why Shiftry was banned. That's why Lysandra Trump card was banned. So why would something not be banned as a result of this? Anyway, we're an hour and 12 minutes in. It's turned into a bit of a monster podcast regardless. So much for my it's late, I need to do a quick one. I need to stop saying that because I never stick to it. Anyway, you know the deal. YouTube.com/PTCG Radio, Twitter @TheWassy. Email ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. It's been a pleasure talking to you, lovely ladies and gentlemen, this week. Hit me up with any thoughts you've got about Breakpoint or Pokemon, or even just to say hello. I'm a friendly chap. I like it when people say hello. And I will be back very soon, ladies and gentlemen. And, well, in fact, in exactly a week, unless you check out my YouTube channel, which you should. Look after yourselves till then. Have a lovely week. I shall see you all, or at least speak to you all next week. Look after yourselves. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.